that can allow the rise for new cults. Which brings us to, after the question of how do they form, who joins them and why? Well, let's first be really clear here. If it's not clear already, brainwashing is not the answer to why people join. The answers tend to be around a number of things. They tend to be around network connections, social characteristics, and also some sort of kind of social solidarity. So let me go through these really quick. What do we mean by social network? Well, it's the case that those that join a cult usually know somebody that's already in a cult. So cults usually do some of their best recruiting off of the friends and family of members. Now this is dicey because members usually are going to cut off old friends and old family that might see cult membership as strange, but at the same time, because they know friends and family, those would be the easiest connections, by the way, to kind of bring somebody into a cult. Also, social characteristics. Some cults reach out to people that are marginal in terms of low income or racial status, because those groups have less authority and access to resources in mainstream religious groups or religious institutions, and so therefore may be more kind of amenable to joining a cult group that more mainstream people might see as suspicious. However, there are also some groups that take not marginal, but as in the case of Scientology, people with a ton of resources and tons of opportunity and tons of power, in which case the cult actually might be seen as like a unique way for those individuals to engage with new unique ideas and therefore kind of create somewhat of a buzz or kind of a unique social profile about themselves. Okay? And then finally, social solidarity. Well, cults are big in terms of trying to bring people in to a space where they can feel they can reorient their whole life. So they can cut off old jobs, relationships, ways of being, and assume completely new ones. So with the Hare Krishna, they have new economic forms of how they try and get money by selling stuff and by being in the marketplace. Or very publicly in their outfits and their music. Also, Hare Krishnas have very have structured ways of having members spend their time, so that members, once they join Hare Krishna, well, they got to do all these other things. They got to be present for meals. They got to connect with other members. They got to go out and proselytize. They have ways of kind of keeping people as members of the cult, okay? Because it usually completely reorients people's lives, okay? So these are important reasons with how people come to be members of cults. Which then leads us to the next question of like, well, how do they stay in cults? Well, I already just mentioned that live in terms of schedules, meals, living arrangements, economic activity, cults will reorient all that and bring somebody into that. You know, here's something that's important is that there's actually high turnover in cults, all right? This is something that not a lot of people realize, that there's actually a good amount. One of the reasons cults stay small is that cults sometimes have a hard time hanging on to members unless they get hyper isolated. And that's because we live in this diverse, pluralistic society. People have economic needs come and go, relationships come and go, conflict happens, and so therefore cults are always kind of needing to reach out as a way to keep people in. And now this is very important. The very fact of reaching out, or what we call proselytizing, helps cult members to stay in the cult. Now usually when we think of the word reaching out or proselytizing, we see that as only a strategy by which cults try and get another member. But what's really important here is that proselytizing efforts like Hare Krishnas in public spaces don't usually work very well. They almost rarely work. Remember, as I mentioned before, usually how members become part of a cult is network connections. So just going out and proselytizing in public is incredibly inefficient. But what it does do is it keeps members in the cult already for a couple of reasons. First off, it gives them activity by which to continually learn about their own cult, because when you have to go and tell people about it, you are always kind of learning and thinking about the cult. And then the other thing is, a lot of cults have teachings that basically say, well, i.e. rejection by others who you're trying to proselytize is evidence of your own commitment to the message, and is also evidence that we have a special religious message that other people can't understand. So don't be surprised if you're always getting rejected when you're trying to proselytize other people. Okay? So this is an important way that cults think about themselves. There's a famous case, the book is called When Prophecy Fails. It was written, one of the authors, his name is Fessinger. It's a famous case of sociologists that hung out with a UFO cult. And they joined this cult as sociologists, hung around the house, and they joined it in the months leading up to when a prophecy was supposed to be realized. And these sociologists basically said, hey, we want to be there with this cult, so we're going to kind of join up. They didn't really fake it, but they were there all the time doing all the cult things with all the other cult members. They said, we're going to join up. We're going to be there to see what happens when the prophecy is supposed to be fulfilled. Well, lo and behold, the prophecy wasn't fulfilled. The UFO divine figures of this cult didn't come to Earth and didn't take the people away. But what they noticed was that instead of destroying the cult, with some cult members, it actually strengthened the cult. And they puzzled about this. They said, well, why is it that some of the people that most believed in the cult actually weren't that affected by the fact that the prophecy failed, and instead started devising new prophecies? And they said, well, what it had to do with in the life of cults is there's oftentimes this, this phrase cognitive dissonance comes from the study. And what they're saying is that cults, like any group, will try and mediate dissonance. They'll try and reduce dissonance. So that in this particular setting, or this particular example, when the prophecy didn't happen, that would lead to a lot of dissonance, a lot of cognitive dissonance. Something's wrong here, this didn't go right, what's happening? And what the sociologists are able to show is that a group has ways of dealing with dissonance. And this group had a couple of ways of dealing with dissonance. First off, it said, well, you know what? Those prophecies weren't that important. Instead, we have a whole nother bunch of prophecies that are even more important, and those are yet to come true. Those are a year or two down the road. So one way the groups deal with this is by downplaying certain ideas. Another way groups deal with this is to pose a failed teaching as a test, to say, well, we're really going to find out who really believes in the ideas of this group, to see who hangs around. And so those of you who don't hang around, well, you were never a true believer. But us, the true believers, we're going to hang around, and we know that further down the road, there's another prophecy that will come true. And finally, and this is really interesting, this connects with proselytization, is that the group members will oftentimes try harder after a failed prophecy to convert others. So this UFO cult that the sociologists studied actually went out and did more activity to try and convert more people after